The air inside Dean Richard Harrington's office always smelled of three things: aged mahogany, expensive espresso, and unearned arrogance. It was the kind of room designed specifically to make you feel incredibly small. The walls were lined with leather-bound books that had never been read, and the floor was covered in a Persian rug that probably cost more than my entire family's generational wealth. I sat at the very edge of the oversized guest chair, my knees pressed tightly together, desperately trying to hide the fraying hem of my thrift store jeans. My oversized gray hoodie, which I had worn for 3 days straight, felt heavy with the cold sweat of sheer panic. My heart was hammering a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I hadn't eaten anything but half a packet of instant ramen in the last 48 hours. And the gnawing ache in my stomach was entirely overshadowed by the terrifying reality of my situation. Across the massive oak desk sat Dean Harrington. He was a man who had never been told no in his entire 50-something years of life. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit with a silk pocket square that matched his tie perfectly. He was currently pretending to read a document, deliberately ignoring me to establish his dominance, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the room stretch on for agonizing minutes. The only sound was the obnoxious, rhythmic ticking of a vintage grandfather clock in the corner. "Dean Harrington," I started, my voice trembling. Despite my best efforts to keep it steady, I just need a minor extension. Or a microloan from the university's emergency relief fund. It's only $1,000. Just $1,000 to cover the gap until my next work-study paycheck clears. If I don't pay the registrar by 5:00 p.m. today, they're going to drop all my classes. He didn't even look up. He simply reached out with a manicured hand, picked up his gold-plated Mont Blanc pen, and tapped it against his desk. Tap, tap, tap. "Miss Evans." He finally sighed, pronouncing my name as if it left a foul taste in his mouth. He slowly leaned back in his plush leather executive chair, steepling his fingers together. He looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses, his eyes sweeping over my cheap sneakers and tired face with absolute disgust. "Do you know what the endowment of this institution is? It is in the billions. We mold the future leaders of the world. Senators, tech visionaries, hedge fund managers." He paused, letting a cruel, razor-thin smile creep onto his lips. "What we do not do," he continued, his voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper, "is operate a charity for those who fundamentally do not belong here. $1,000. You might as well ask me to fund a vacation. You are on financial aid. You contribute nothing to our alumni network. You have no legacy standing. Frankly, you are a drain on our resources." The words felt like a physical slap across the face. My vision blurred with tears of frustration and exhaustion, but I bit the inside of my cheek hard to keep them from falling. I wasn't going to let him see me cry. "Please," I whispered, stripping away the last ounce of my pride. "I have a 4. N'olgue pas. I'm top of my computer science cohort. I just need a little time." A bureaucratic error held up my Pell Grant. "Enough," he snapped, slamming his hand flat on the desk. The sharp sound made me jump. "I am tired of the endless excuses from students of your fatter demographic. The world operates on capital, Miss Evans. If you don't have it, you don't play the game. It is high time you pack your bags, return to whatever quaint little neighborhood you crawled out of, and make room for a student whose family can actually afford the tuition." He turned away from me in absolute dismissal, rolling his chair toward his massive, dual-monitor computer setup. "I am accessing your student portal right now," he stated coldly, his fingers flying across his mechanical keyboard. "I am formally initiating your academic withdrawal and freezing your campus access. You will have until midnight to vacate your dormitory. I suggest you start finding some cardboard boxes." I sat there, completely paralyzed. My entire world was collapsing. All those sleepless nights studying, all the sacrifices my mother made, all the meals I skipped gone, wiped out by a few keystrokes from a man who spent more on his morning coffee routine than I had in my entire bank account. I watched his face as he clicked the mouse, waiting for the university's financial database to load my profile. At first, he looked bored, smug, triumphant. Even he took a slow sip of his sparkling water. Then the screen loaded. It happened in slow motion. The smug smile on Dean Harrington's face didn't just fade, it shattered. He froze mid-sip. The glass of sparkling water halted inches from his lips. His eyes, previously narrowed with elitist disdain, suddenly bulged so wide I thought they might pop out of his skull. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pride at honest. Palegre. A sudden, violent tremor seized his hand, and the heavy crystal glass slipped from his fingers, crashing onto the mahogany desk. Water and ice spilled everywhere, soaking into his precious paperwork and splashing onto his bespoke suit, but he didn't even flinch. He didn't seem to notice. His breathing became shallow and erratic. He leaned closer to the monitor, his nose almost touching the glass. As if his eyesight was failing him, his jaw dropped open, and a choked, strangled sound escaped his throat like a man who had just seen a ghost, or a nuclear bomb detonating in the distance. He frantically hit the refresh key, once, twice, 3 times. Each time the page reloaded, his panic multiplied. Sweat thick, cold beads of it suddenly erupted across his forehead. He tore his reading glasses off his face with shaking hands and rubbed his eyes violently. This is impossible, he gasped, his voice cracking, entirely devoid of its previous aristocratic bass. This is a system error. This is a cyber attack. There is no way. Dean Harrington, I asked, my own panic rising. Did my account show negative thousands? Was I being sued for the bounce check? What's wrong? What does it say? He slowly turned his head to look at me. The man who had just looked at me like I was a cockroach now looked at me as if I were a literal god that had just descended from the heavens. His lips trembled. Your linked external financial profile, he stammered, pointing a violently shaking finger at the screen. The university's system automatically syncs with your verified banking ledger for tuition withdrawal. Miss Evans, your checking account. It currently holds an available cash balance of $68. 412500. The room went dead silent. The grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking. $68 million. Before I explain how a broke, exhausted, starving college student who literally couldn't afford a $12 textbook suddenly had the GDP of a small island nation sitting quietly in a checking account she didn't even know existed. Hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to get completely insane. To understand how completely absurd that number on the dean's screen was, you have to rewind just 72 hours. Because 3 days before I became the wealthiest person in the room, I was arguably the poorest person in the entire state. My reality wasn't yacht parties or offshore accounts. It was a grueling, suffocating daily grind just to exist. I lived in a cramped, drafty dorm room that always smelled faintly of mildew and desperation. While my classmates were taking weekend ski trips to Aspen or flying to Cabo for spring break, I was working 3 different minimum wage campus jobs. I scrubbed industrial pans in the dining hall at 5:00 a.m., shelved books in the law library until midnight, and spent my weekends tutoring the very same rich kids who mocked me behind my back. And still, I was drowning. My lifeline was a heavily taped, 5-year-old laptop that sounded like a dying lawnmower every time I booted it up to write code. I was a computer science major, specializing in machine learning, trying to build the future on a machine that could barely run a basic web browser. Every single penny I earned went toward tuition, textbooks that cost a predatory $300 apiece, and the cheapest sustenance I could find. My daily food budget was exactly $3.50. If I splurged on a coffee, it meant I skipped dinner. Poverty isn't just a lack of money. It's a constant, heavy brain fog. It's the terrifying math you do in your head every time you stand at a cash register, praying your debit card doesn't make that humiliating declined beep. But the lack of money wasn't even the worst part of attending an elite, hyper-expensive university. The worst part was the people, specifically, people like Chloe Vanguard. Chloe was a 4th-generation legacy student whose family name was practically etched into the marble pillars of the business school. She drove a custom baby blue Porsche 911 to class, wore head-to-toe Prada de Lapin, 00 AM, lectures, and treated anyone with a net worth under $5 million like they were an exotic, slightly disgusting species of insect. On Monday morning, the week of the tuition deadline, I was sitting in the front row of my advanced algorithms class. I was exhausted, running on 2 hours of sleep, wearing my only presentable pair of shoes, a pair of white canvas sneakers. I obsessively scrubbed with a toothbrush to keep clean, so I wouldn't look out of place. Chloe walked in 15 minutes late, loudly talking on her phone, holding an enormous iced matcha latte. She shimmied down my aisle to get to her seat. As she squeezed past my desk, she didn't just brush against me. She deliberately tilted her cup. A tidal wave of sticky, green liquid cascaded directly onto my lap, soaking my jeans and completely ruining my clean white shoes. I gasped, jumping out of my seat as the freezing liquid seeped into my socks. The entire lecture hall went dead silent. Chloe didn't gasp. She didn't drop her phone. She just stood there, looking down at my ruined shoes with a smirk that made my blood boil. "Oops," she drawled, her voice dripping with fake endiz, syrupy sweetness. "My bad. I guess I didn't see you there. You blend right into the cheap furniture." "Are you kidding me?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and rage. "Clue. These are my only shoes for work." She rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, theatrical sigh that echoed across the quiet room. "Oh, please. Don't throw a tantrum. Charity case. What do those cost?" $20 at Walmart. I carry more than that in loose change in my glove compartment. Send me a Venmo request if you're really that desperate. A few of her sycophant friends in the back rows snickered. I stood there, humiliated, my face burning red. But she wasn't done. Chloe turned to her friends, speaking loudly enough for the professor and everyone else to hear. "Honestly, I don't even know why the university admits these financial aid kids. They drag down the prestige of the entire institution. It's a private university, not a homeless shelter. Does the school get a tax write-off for letting you breathe our air?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my heavy textbook right at her perfectly contoured face. But I couldn't. I was on academic probation due to missed payments, one disciplinary infraction, and my meager scholarship would be revoked entirely. I had to swallow my pride, grab my cheap paper towels from the bathroom, and sit through a 2-hour lecture smelling like spoiled milk, knowing I had a 4-hour dining hall shift right after. But the universe, apparently, wasn't done torturing me. The real disaster struck on Tuesday afternoon. The deadline for the semester's tuition balance. I had been waiting for my state-issued Pell Grant and my work-study direct deposit to clear. It was exactly $2.450. It was just enough to cover my final tuition installment, leaving me with exactly $14.32 to survive on for the next 2 weeks. I walked to the campus ATM, my stomach in knots. I slid my worn-out debit card into the slot. I typed in my PIN. I pressed check balance. The screen blinked. Available balance. Fu Sensha Wume Yuan Lingling. Pending transactions. Failed. My heart plummeted into my stomach. A cold sweat broke out across my entire body. -$35 failed. I practically sprinted to the financial aid office, frantically dialing my bank on the way. After waiting on hold for an agonizing 45 minutes, a customer service rep gave me the death sentence. A bureaucratic processing error between the state government and the university's third-party payment system. The grant was delayed. It would take 7 to 10 business days to clear. 7 to 10 days. But I need it today. I had pleaded into the phone, tears finally spilling hot down my cheeks. Standing outside the administration building. "If I don't pay the bursar by 5 p.m., I get purged from the system. I lose my classes. I lose my dorm. I'm sorry." "Mom," the robotic voice on the other end replied, "there is nothing we can do. You will have to secure an alternative method of payment." An alternative method of payment. I didn't have parents I could call. I didn't have savings. I had absolutely nothing. The financial aid counselor looked at me with pity. the only person who can put an administrative hold on an automatic expulsion for non-payment is the dean of students. You have to ask him for an emergency discretionary extension. But I have to warn you, Dean Harrington is not known for his leniency. That was the understatement of the century. Which brought me exactly to where we started, sitting in that mahogany office, starving, ruined shoes, wearing a frayed hoodie, begging a billionaire-adjacent snob for a pathetic $1,000 lifeline, only to be told I was a drain on society who needed to pack my bags. Until he opened my file. Until the university's automated system bypassed my empty, overdrafted checking account and linked directly to an obscure, hidden escrow ledger tied to my social security number. And now, the man who had just told me I didn't belong at his school was staring at a screen that said I possessed $68. 41500. And he looked like he was about to have a massive coronary event right there in his custom suit. For a solid 45 seconds, neither of us breathed. The heavy ticking of the antique grandfather clock was the only proof that time hadn't completely stopped. Dean Harrington remained frozen in his chair, his eyes locked on the monitor, the spilled sparkling water dripping off the edge of his mahogany desk and pooling onto his custom Italian leather shoes. He didn't seem to care. The man who had just sneered at me, who had told me I was a worthless drain on his prestigious institution, looked as though he had just looked directly into the sun. Then the paralysis broke. An absolute chaos ensued. "Miss Evans," he suddenly gasped, his voice pitching upward into a frantic, reedy squeak that completely shattered his aristocratic facade. He scrambled to his feet so fast that his heavy leather executive chair rolled backward and slammed into the wood-paneled wall. He lunged across the desk, completely ignoring the puddle of water he was dragging his expensive silk sleeves through, and grabbed a pristine, unopened bottle of San Pellegrino from his mini-fridge. He practically tripped over his own feet as he rushed around the desk toward me. "Please, please, Miss Evans, do not sit on that stiff guest chair. That is entirely unacceptable for a student of your Billionaire. Your immense stature," he stammered, his hands visibly shaking as he tried to unscrew the cap of the water bottle. He pointed frantically toward his own desk. "Take my chair, please. Let me adjust the lumbar support for you. Are you too warm? I can adjust the climate control. Do you need a cold compress?" I stared at him, utterly bewildered. I pressed myself deeper into the cheap fabric of the guest chair, pulling my frayed hoodie tighter around my chest. "Dean Harrington, what are you doing? You just told me to go pack my bags in cardboard boxes." "A joke," he cried out, his face flushing a violent shade of crimson. He let out a strained, hysterical laugh that sounded like a dying hyena. "Ah, terrible. Ill-timed test of character. Miss Evans, we pride ourselves on pushing our top-tier students to their absolute limits. You passed. Flying colors. Brillant." He was sweating profusely now. He rushed to the heavy oak doors of his office, flipped the brass deadbolt to lock it, and quickly pulled the velvet curtains shut over the glass panels, as if he were trying to hide a state secret from the rest of the administration building. "Dean, you're scaring me," I said, my voice trembling. "Did my scholarship finally clear? Do I have the $1,000? He stopped in his tracks, turning to look at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. He looked at me the way a peasant might look at a reigning monarch. $1,000, he whispered, almost reverently. "Miss Evans, you could buy this entire administration building in cash right now, bulldoze it into a parking lot, and your accountant wouldn't even notice the dent in your portfolio." Slowly, carefully, as if handling a live explosive, he walked back to his desk and grabbed the edges of his massive 12 ultra-wide curved monitor. He swiveled it around so it faced me directly. "Look," he said, his voice dropping to a hushed, trembling whisper. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. It was the university's ultra-secure financial clearinghouse portal, a system directly linked to the Federal Reserve routing network to verify student assets for those who paid tuition out of pocket. In the top right corner, my name, Eleanor Evans, was displayed next to my social security number and student ID. Below that, under the section labeled Verified Liquid Assets, Tier 1 Linked Accounts, was a string of numbers. A very, very long string of numbers. 68,412. 500,000. I blinked. I rubbed my tired eyes. Assuming the severe sleep deprivation and lack of calories had finally triggered a full-blown hallucination, I looked back at the screen. The numbers were still there. 8 digits, 2 commas. 68,412,500 and 0 cents. A cold, terrifying chill washed over my entire body. The blood drained from my face, and my stomach plummeted into my shoes. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel relief. I felt a tidal wave of pure, paralyzing terror. Oh my God. I choked out, clutching my chest, as my heart began to hammer against my ribs. Oh my God. I am going to federal prison. Dean Harrington looked entirely thrown off guard. Prison, Miss Evans. What are you? Who did this? I shrieked, jumping out of my seat, backing away from the monitor as if it were radioactive. Is this a cartel? Am I a money mule? Oh my God. My identity was stolen. Someone used my social security number to launder money for the mafia. The FBI is going to kick down that door and shoot me in the head. Miss Evans, please calm down, the dean pleaded, waving his hands frantically, terrified that my yelling would attract attention from the hallway. This is a direct, cryptographic API link to the central banking ledger. This cannot be spoofed. This account is legally, unequivocally tied to your biometric and tax profile. This is a legitimate escrow holding the actually. I have exactly $14 to my name. I screamed back, tears of sheer panic streaming down my face. I literally stole toilet paper from the library bathroom this morning because I couldn't afford a roll of Charmin. I have never seen $1 million in my life. You need to call the police. Call the SEC. Call Homeland Security. I was hyperventilating, entirely convinced that an armored SWAT van was already tearing across the campus lawn. I racked my brain. Had I clicked a phishing link? Had I accidentally written a script that hacked into a bank? I only ever pirated PDF textbooks. Is this the penalty for pirating a $300 calculus book? Dean Harrington, realizing I was on the verge of a total nervous breakdown, leaped across the desk and slammed his hand onto his heavy Cisco office phone. I am not calling the police. Miss Evans, because you are not a criminal, he said, trying to project a soothing tone but failing miserably due to his own greed-fueled adrenaline. I am going to call the premier private wealth concierge at the institution holding this ledger. We will verify this immediately. He punched in a series of numbers, his manicured finger trembling so badly, he had to retype it twice. He hit the speakerphone button. The dial tone echoed loudly in the tense, silent office. Ring, ring. Thank you for calling Silicon Valley Fidelity, Ultra-High Net Worth Division. Please hold for a senior managing partner. A polished, automated voice hummed through the speaker. I paced the floor, biting my nails, pacing back and forth across the Persian rug. Dean Harrington stood at attention, literally fixing his tie, trying to look presentable for a phone call. After a torturous 30 seconds, the line clicked. This is Arthur Sterling, senior partner and head of legal escrow. To whom am I speaking on this heavily encrypted line? A deep sevela, authoritative voice demanded. The dean cleared his throat, puffing out his chest. Yes, hello, Mr. Sterling. This is Dean Richard Harrington of the university. I am sitting here with one of our most esteemed, brilliant students, Miss Eleanor Evans. We are looking at a routed balance of $68 million tied to her social security number, and she is quite distressed, believing it to be an error or fraud. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The sound of a chair screeching against a floor echoed through the speaker. Eleanor Evans. The lawyer's voice lost all its corporate polish, suddenly vibrating with absolute, frantic urgency. Are you telling me you actually have Eleanor Evans in the room with you right now? Yes, I squeaked out, leaning toward the phone. I swear I didn't steal it. Just take it back. Please don't send me to jail. A massive, booming laugh erupted from the speakerphone. It was a laugh of pure, overwhelming relief. Jail, Miss Evans. I have had a team of 6 private investigators looking for you for 2.5 years, Mr. Sterling said, his voice echoing through the mahogany office, cementing my reality. You aren't going to jail. You are the sole, legal owner of every single cent in that account. And quite frankly, Miss Evans, you are one of the most brilliant minds in Silicon Valley, and you didn't even know it. 2.5 years, I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. I gripped the edge of the mahogany desk to keep my knees from buckling. Mr. Sterling, there has to be a mistake. I am a 20-year-old college student. I work in a cafeteria. I don't even have a savings account, let alone a legal team looking for me. The speakerphone crackled as Arthur Sterling let out a warm, booming chuckle. It wasn't the condescending laugh of Dean Harrington. It was the sound of a man who had just solved a multi-million-dollar puzzle. Miss Evans, let me ask you a question. Sterling's voice echoed through the opulent office. Do you remember your freshman year, specifically? A rainy Thanksgiving break where you stayed in your dormitory. You uploaded a compressed file to an obscure open-source developer forum under the username CodeandRamen99. You called the repository Project Featherweight. I froze. My mind violently hit the rewind button, flashing back to November of my freshman year. I hadn't gone home for Thanksgiving because I couldn't afford the $80 bus ticket. I was completely alone in my drafty dorm, eating cold soup from a can. My ancient, refurbished laptop kept crashing. Every time I tried to run standard graphics rendering software for my computer science final, frustrated, bored, and highly caffeinated, I spent 72 hours straight writing a completely new, hyper-efficient algorithmic bypass. I designed a neural network that could generate high-resolution AI art using virtually zero processing power. It was a total fluke, a side project born out of sheer poverty because I couldn't afford a proper graphics card. When I finished, I casually dumped the code onto a public developer forum, clicked a standard Creative Commons with commercial royalty license agreement without reading it, and entirely forgot about it by Monday morning. Yeah, I breathed, my eyes widening as the memory surfaced. I remember. It was just a stupid compression script so my laptop wouldn't overheat. What about it? A stupid compression script. Sterling laughed again, though this time it sounded almost incredulous. Miss Evans, that stupid script contained a revolutionary neural rendering architecture. 6 months after you uploaded it, a massive Silicon Valley tech giant who I legally cannot name until you sign the NDA. But let's just say they make the phones we all use discovered your code. Dean Harrington let out a soft, whimpering sound. He had sunk back into his chair, his custom suit utterly ruined by the spilled water. Listening to this conversation like a man witnessing a miracle, they didn't just use it. Miss Evans, Sterling continued, his tone turning dead serious. They integrated your exact architectural bypass into their flagship creative AI suite. It is currently operating on over 2 billion devices worldwide. And because of the specific open-source commercial license you blindly clicked, they were legally obligated to pay you a micro-royalty. Exactly $0. 0.005 for every 1,000 commercial generations. Half a cent, I asked, my brain struggling to process the math. How does half a cent turn into... I couldn't even bring myself to say the number. Volume. Miss Evans. Unprecedented. Global volume. The lawyer replied smoothly. When your code went live on their global servers, those micropennies started compounding. They tried to contact you, but the email address attached to your developer profile was a burner account, something along the lines of pleasant coffee mail. Com. I clamped my hand over my mouth. I had lost the password to that joke email account sophomore year and never bothered to reset it. It was completely abandoned. I had likely received hundreds of frantic emails from one of the most powerful tech companies on Earth, and they had all gone straight into a digital black hole. Because they couldn't reach you to buy out the IP, they legally had to put your royalties into a blind escrow trust. Sterling explained, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Miss Evans. That account has been quietly accumulating wealth for 2 years. As of this morning. After all, federal taxes and escrow management fees have been meticulously cleared. Your liquid cash balance is exactly $68. 412500. 0. I stared at the blinking speakerphone. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but not from fear anymore. A strange, electric warmth was beginning to spread through my chest. And it's mine, I whispered. All of it free and clear. Every single penny, Sterling confirmed. In fact, because the software is still active, that account is currently generating an estimated $45,000,000 a day in passive income. Miss Evans, you don't just have money, you have generational, institutional wealth. I have a private jet on standby at San Francisco International. Say the word, and I will fly to you tonight to hand over the platinum cards and the physical portfolio. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The heavy, suffocating fog of poverty, the constant fear of eviction, the agonizing math of buying groceries, the humiliation of wearing ruined shoes evaporated in a single, defining heartbeat. I wasn't a charity case. I wasn't a drain on the system. I was a self-made tech mogul. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice suddenly devoid of any tremor. It was steady, cold, powerful. Don't fly out just yet. Wire a platinum black card to my campus mailbox by tomorrow morning. I have a little bit of unfinished business to take care of here first. Consider it done. Miss Evans, welcome to the top 1%. The line clicked dead. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. I slowly stood up from the cheap guest chair. I didn't slouch. I pulled my shoulders back, feeling a sudden, immense weightlessness. I looked across the mahogany desk. Dean Richard Harrington, the man who, less than 20 minutes ago, had gleefully tried to destroy my entire future over a measly $1,000 was practically melting into a puddle of his own terror. His silk tie was askew. His face was the color of chalk. He slowly stood up, his knees visibly knocking together. He looked at me not as a student, but as an apex predator that had just wandered into his cage. Miss Evans, he whispered, his voice cracking pitifully. He raised his shaking hands in a gesture of pure surrender. I deeply apologize for my earlier tone. I was under immense stress. The university budget. Please, you must understand. He was terrified. He knew that with one phone call, I could buy the debt of his entire extended family. I could fund a lawsuit that would keep him in court until he died. I held his entire pathetic existence in the palm of my hand. I walked slowly around the desk. My ruined, coffee-stained canvas sneakers, leaving damp footprints on his priceless Persian rug. I stopped right next to him. He flinched, instinctively shutting his eyes. Dean Harrington, I said softly, looking at the sweat dripping down his temple. You are going to completely reverse my academic withdrawal. You are going to mark my tuition as paid in full for the rest of the decade. And then, you are going to keep your mouth completely, entirely shut about what you saw on that screen today. He nodded frantically, his multiple chins wobbling. Yes, absolutely. Not a word. Miss Evans, you have my solemn oath. Good. I smiled. A cold, sharp expression that made him swallow hard. Because if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I won't just get you fired. I will buy the company that prints your resume and burn it to the ground. Understood. Crystal clear. Miss Evans, he squeaked. I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy oak doors. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, the bright fluorescent lights of the hallway spilling into the dark office. I was going back to my dorm. I was going to put on my thrifted jeans. I was going to go to my classes tomorrow exactly as I always had, because now that I had absolute, undeniable power, I wanted to see exactly how far the arrogant elites of this university would go when they thought I was still nothing. The ultimate test was about to begin. The next morning, at exactly 8, I stood in the dingy, fluorescent-lit mailroom of my dormitory, My hands were perfectly steady as I turned the tiny brass key to open mailbox 412. Inside, sitting on top of a flyer for discounted pizza, was a sleek, matte black FedEx envelope with the return address, Silicon Valley Fidelity Ultra High Net Worth Division. I tore the pull tab. Inside was a heavy, velvet-lined box containing a solid titanium, laser-engraved black card. It felt cool and impossibly heavy in my palm. It didn't have a preset spending limit. It was directly tethered to an account generating $45,000,000 a day in passive income. I stared at my name, embossed in silver lettering, then slowly slid the most powerful financial instrument in the world into my peeling, pink faux leather wallet that I had bought at a dollar store 3 years ago. The juxtaposition was almost poetic. I looked at my reflection in the smudged mailroom mirror. I was wearing the exact same oversized, faded gray hoodie. My feet were still shoved into the white canvas sneakers that Chloe had intentionally stained with her matcha latte. To the naked eye, I was still Eleanor Evans, the broke, pathetic scholarship student who survived on cafeteria, scraps, and pity. But internally, the tectonic plates of my universe had shifted. The crushing, suffocating anxiety that had sat on my chest for 20 years was gone. I walked out of the dorm and stepped onto the pristine campus quad, breathing in the crisp morning air. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a predator observing a cage full of very arrogant, very oblivious mice. I headed straight for the student union library, the absolute epicenter of campus elitism. I sat at a corner table, pulling out my cracked, 5-year-old laptop. I didn't even open a textbook. I just sat back and waited. It didn't take long for the bait to be taken. The scent of an overpowering, custom-blended Tom Ford perfume hit my nose before she even spoke. Chloe Vanguard marched into the study lounge, flanked by 2 of her synchronized sorority clones. She was holding a brand-new, cherry-red quilted Chanel handbag like it was a newborn baby. She spotted me in the corner. Her perfectly glossed lips curled into a vicious, predatory smirk. She broke away from her friends and sauntered over to my table, aggressively dropping her new designer bag right onto my notebook. Well, Chloe sneered, crossing her arms and looking down her nose at me. I am genuinely shocked to see you still occupying space here. Evans, I heard a little rumor from the registrar's assistant that your tuition check bounced into the stratosphere. Didn't you go crying to Dean Harrington yesterday begging for pennies? I slowly looked up at her. Previously, an interaction like this would have made my throat close up. My face would have burned with shame. I would have packed my things and practically run away to avoid a scene. Now I just looked at her with mild, detached amusement. I looked at her $8. Nol handbag. Doing the mental math. It took my account roughly 4 hours of existing on autopilot to generate the money she was currently treating as a supreme personality trait. I had a meeting with the dean. Yes, I replied, my voice completely flat and calm. Chloe laughed. A sharp, grating sound designed to attract the attention of everyone in the lounge. Let me guess. He told you to pack up your tragic little thrift store wardrobe and get out. I mean, look at those shoes. Eleanor, they're literally stained. It's embarrassing. I spent $8, $500 on this bag yesterday just because I was bored. That is objectively more money than your family's entire generational net worth. You don't belong here. You never did. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. I didn't flinch. I didn't blush. I just smiled. It wasn't a defensive smile. It was a slow, knowing, terrifyingly calm smile. You're right, Chloe, I said softly, locking eyes with her. I don't belong in the same tax bracket as you. Not anymore. Chloe frowned, her perfectly plucked eyebrows knitting together in confusion. She was expecting me to cry. She was expecting me to cower. My absolute lack of fear was deeply unsettling to her. Whatever. Psycho, she snapped, grabbing her bag off my table. Enjoy your last 48 hours on campus. Try not to steal any of the library books on your way out. She spun on her heel and strutted away. I watched her go, the smile never leaving my face. Oh, Chloe, you have absolutely no idea. I packed my laptop and walked out into the main hallway of the business building. The universe, having a brilliant sense of comedic timing, presented the second half of my test right in front of me. Dean Richard Harrington was standing in the middle of the corridor, his face purple with rage. He was aggressively berating a terrified freshman work-study student for accidentally tracking a clump of mud onto the marble floor. "You are utterly incompetent," the dean roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings as a crowd of wealthy students, including Chloe, stopped to watch the spectacle. "Do you have any concept of respect for this institution? I will have your financial aid revoked by noon. You are a disgrace to—" He stopped mid-sentence. Over the shoulder of the terrified freshman, Dean Harrington made eye contact with me. I was casually leaning against a marble pillar, my hands stuffed into the pockets of my hoodie, watching him with dead, unblinking eyes. The transformation was instantaneous and spectacular. All the blood violently drained from the dean's face, turning him the color of old oatmeal. His jaw snapped shut so fast I could hear his teeth click. A thick bead of sweat immediately broke out on his forehead. The ferocious, elitist tyrant vanished, replaced by a man who looked like he was staring down the barrel of a loaded cannon. He physically shoved the bewildered freshman aside, practically tripping over his own expensive leather shoes, and rushed toward me. The entire hallway, including Chloe, who was watching from 10 feet away, went completely silent. Dean Harrington stopped exactly 3 feet from me and executed what could only be described as a frantic, subservient half-bow. "Miss Evans," he boomed, his voice cracking into a high pitch of sheer, unadulterated panic. "Good morning. What an absolute privilege to see you gracing the halls today. Is the temperature in the corridor to your liking? Do you require a private study room? I can have the faculty lounge cleared for you immediately." I didn't move a muscle. I just let the silence stretch, letting him sweat under the fluorescent lights. I glanced at Chloe. Her jaw was practically touching the marble floor. Her eyes were darting rapidly between me, my stained shoes, and the most powerful man on campus who was currently treating me like visiting royalty. "I'm fine, Richard," I said, intentionally using his first name in front of dozens of students. The collective gasp in the hallway was audible. "Just making sure the university is running smoothly. Try not to yell so loudly. It gives me a headache." "Of course. Absolutely. Miss Evans. Profuse apologies," he stammered, bowing his head again, wiping his brow with a silk handkerchief. "Not another peep from me. Have a flawless day." I pushed off the pillar and walked down the hallway, parting the crowd of stunned, whispering students like the Red Sea. Chloe looked as though she had short-circuited by, staring at me with a mixture of profound confusion and rising horror. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the building, my eyes caught a massive, gold-leafed poster displayed on an easel in the lobby. The 75th Annual University Legacy Gala, a night of prestige and philanthropy. Black tie exclusively. I stopped and read the fine print. The gala was this Saturday. It was the night the university's board of trustees shamelessly courted mega-donors. It was the night Chloe's family always bought the center table to flaunt their wealth. It was the ultimate playground for the arrogant, intouchable elite. I reached into my cheap wallet and traced the raised titanium letters of the black card with my thumb. They thought they owned this school. They thought money gave them the right to crush people like me into the dirt. It was time to show them what real power looked like. It was time to buy the dirt. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy stillness. Electric anticipation. The 75th Annual University Legacy Gala was being held in the grand atrium of the campus's historic center. It was a suffocatingly arrogant affair, a sea of tuxedos, glittering jewels, and old money. Tickets were exclusively by invitation, with a minimum required donation of $10. 0, 0, 0, just to secure a seat at a table. For 3 days, Arthur Sterling and my newly acquired wealth management team had been working around the clock. When you have $68 million in liquid cash, the world bends to your absolute will. I didn't just buy a dress. Arthur flew in a private stylist from Paris. When I stepped out of my suite at the Four Seasons, I was entirely unrecognizable. The frayed hoodie and stained canvas sneakers were gone, I was wearing a breathtaking, custom-tailored emerald green Givenchy silk gown that draped flawlessly against my frame. Around my neck rested a vintage Cartier diamond collar that, quite literally, cost more than the entire university library system. My hair and makeup were immaculate, sharp, and terrifyingly elegant. I didn't take a campus bus to the gala. I arrived in a chauffeur-driven, obsidian black Maybach Pullman. As the car glided up to the red carpet lining the atrium steps, the valet rushed forward to open my door. I stepped out into the cool night air. The flash of a few local society photographers' cameras reflecting off the diamonds at my throat. I didn't smile. I walked up the marble steps with the cold, measured grace of an apex predator returning to its hunting ground. Inside, the grand ballroom was an explosion of crystal chandeliers and flowing champagne. A live string quartet was playing in the corner. Near the front, the University Board of Trustees, the president, and Dean Richard Harrington were huddled together, nervously checking their Rolexes. Arthur Sterling had strategically leaked a rumor to the board that a mysterious Silicon Valley megadonor was attending tonight to scout the university for a historic financial endowment. They were salivating, desperate to find out who it was. Off to the right, holding court at the most expensive VIP table, was Chloe Vanguard. She was wearing a loud, heavily sequined gold dress, laughing shrilly with her family and her sorority sycophants, holding a glass of Dom Perignon. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and casually stepped into the center of the room. It took exactly 45 seconds for the whispers to start tu noto. People turned. The string quartet seemed to lose their rhythm for a brief moment as the musicians stared. I looked like royalty, but there was a dangerous, unfamiliar edge to me that made the old money elites instinctively part ways as I walked forward. Chloe spotted me. At first, her eyes simply glazed over the emerald dress and the diamonds. Then her brain processed my face. Her perfectly manicured jaw dropped in sheer, unadulterated shock. For a second, she looked like she had seen a ghost. But that shock quickly mutated into furious, deeply offended rage. She slammed her champagne glass down on her table and marched directly toward me, frantically signaling for two massive, earpiece-wearing security guards to follow her. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Chloe shrieked, her shrill voice cutting through the elegant hum of the ballroom. Several wealthy alumni turned to watch. I stopped, slowly turning to face her. I didn't say a word. I just raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Don't look at me like that, Evans," she sneered, stepping aggressively into my personal space, though she couldn't help but nervously glance at the blinding Cartier diamonds around my neck. "I don't know who you conned to rent that dress, or how you snuck past the doors, but this is a $10,000 a plate charity gala. It is for actual donors, not broke, check-bouncing charity cases who wear stained shoes to class." She turned to the two hulking security guards, pointing a rigid finger right at my chest. "She is a trespasser. She is on academic and financial probation. Grab her and throw her out the back service doors immediately before she steals the silverware." The guard stepped forward, looking strictly professional, reaching out to grab my arms. "I wouldn't touch me if I were you," I said softly, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority that made the two massive men freeze in their tracks before Chloe could scream another insult. A horrifying, strangled gasp echoed across the ballroom. Dean Richard Harrington had just turned around. He had seen the emerald dress. He had seen my face. And most importantly, he had seen Chloe directing security to physically assault me. The dean didn't just walk over. He literally sprinted. He sprinted with such violent, panicked force that he collided with a waiter, sending a silver tray of champagne flutes crashing to the marble floor in a spectacular explosion of glass. He didn't even look back. "Stop. Do not touch her. Back away immediately," the dean roared, his voice cracking hysterically as he practically tackled the security guards to get them away from me. The entire ballroom went dead silent. The string quartet stopped playing abruptly. 300 of the wealthiest people in the state turned to stare at the dean of students, who was currently hyperventilating, his face purple, standing between me and the guards as if taking a bullet for the president. Dean Harrington. Chloe laughed nervously, completely oblivious to the gravity of the situation. What are you doing? It's just Eleanor. She crashed the party. Have her thrown out, so we can wait for the mega donor. The dean looked at Chloe with a mixture of absolute terror and homicidal rage. Miss Vanguard, shut your mouth this instant. Here you sit. Spit flying from his lips. I decided I was tired of the appetizers. It was time for the main course. I bypassed Chloe entirely, leaving her standing there, looking like a slapped fish. I walked smoothly toward the main stage, gracefully ascending the stairs to the crystal podium reserved for the university president. The president stepped aside, completely bewildered. I adjusted the microphone. A sharp screech of feedback echoed through the silent, massive hall. Every single eye was glued to me. Good evening, Board of Trustees. Good evening, esteemed guests, I said, my voice smooth, amplified, and ringing with absolute dominance. I understand you have been waiting all night for a mysterious Silicon Valley investor, someone looking to make a profound, game-changing contribution to this institution. I reached into my sleek emerald clutch. I pulled out the solid titanium black card. I didn't just hold it up. I casually tossed it onto the crystal podium. It hit the glass with a heavy, distinct, metallic clack that echoed through the microphone. My name is Eleanor Evans, I announced, looking directly into the crowd, my eyes locking onto Chloe's pale, trembling face. I am the sole proprietor of the Project Featherweight AI algorithm, heavily integrated into the global mobile market. And as of Tuesday, my liquid portfolio crossed the threshold required to make me the mega donor you are all so desperately waiting for. A collective, massive gasp ripped through the room. The president of the university gripped the edge of his table, his eyes bulging. Chloe's father, a prominent real estate developer, actually dropped his scotch glass onto the floor. I leaned closer to the microphone, delivering the fatal blow. I am prepared to offer this institution a historic stata, one-time cash endowment of $100. Ling 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 ling. 00. The number hung in the air like a detonated bomb. $100 million. It was double the university's annual operating budget. It was a sum of money that could build entire new colleges, fund thousands of scholarships, and cement the Board of Trustees' legacy forever. People started whispering frantically. The dean looked like he was about to faint from sheer financial ecstasy. However, I continued, my voice slicing through the noise, silencing the room instantly. This $100, ling 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 ling, 00 check comes with a legally binding, non-negotiable contract drawn up by my legal team at Silicon Valley Fidelity. I picked up the black card, the diamonds at my throat catching the chandelier light, radiating, blinding, brilliance. If you want the money, I smiled. A cold, merciless smile that made Dean Harrington's blood run cold. We need to talk about some immediate restructuring. The silence in the grand ballroom was so absolute, so heavy, that you could have heard a single pin drop onto the marble floor. 300 of the most powerful, arrogant people in the state were staring up at me, entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the number I had just dropped. $100 million. The university president, a man who usually commanded rooms with booming authority, he was currently gripping the edge of his table so hard his knuckles were white, looking at me with a mixture of worship and sheer greed. Miss Evans, the president finally managed to speak, his voice trembling slightly into the quiet room. He practically shoved his own chair out of the way to take a step closer to the stage. $100 million is an unprecedented, historic endowment. The Board of Trustees we are deeply humbled. We will absolutely accommodate any legally binding restructuring you see fit. Name your terms. I smiled. It was the exact answer Arthur Sterling had promised me they would give. Institutional loyalty only extends as far as the checkbook. Excellent, I said, my voice echoing through the crisp microphone. I pulled a sleek, leather-bound folder from my clutch and laid it open on the crystal podium. Condition number 1. I began, my eyes locking onto the VIP table on the right. The Vanguard family currently holds the exclusive commercial real estate, supply, and catering contracts for the university's upcoming East Campus expansion. As of tonight, every single one of those contracts is immediately and permanently terminated. This institution will sever all financial and social ties with Vanguard Enterprises. Down on the floor. Mr. Vanguard. Chloe's father turned the color of an overripe tomato. What? He bellowed, jumping to his feet, knocking his expensive scotch glass onto the floor where it shattered. You cannot do that. We have been legacy partners for decades. This is an outrage. Mr. President, you can't possibly agree to this. The president barely even glanced at him. He looked right at me and nodded instantly. Done. The Vanguard contracts will be annulled by Monday morning. Chloe let out a horrified, breathless shriek. Without those multi-million-dollar university contracts, her family's flagship business would take a catastrophic hit to their stock value and public standing. The baby blue Porsche and the $8.500 Chanel bags were suddenly a very, very distant memory. She stared at me, tears of pure humiliation ruining her perfect mascara. Finally realizing, she had spent the last 2 years bullying the one person who could completely dismantle her entire life. Condition number 2. I continued smoothly, ignoring the Vanguard family's meltdown. The College of Business and Economics will undergo an immediate rebranding. The old, outdated facade will be torn down. Effective next week. The marble archway will read, the Eleanor Evans School of Business and Artificial Intelligence. The board members aggressively nodded in unison. A few of them even started clapping. And finally, I said, my voice dropping an octave, taking on a cold, razor-sharp edge. Condition number 3. I turned my gaze directly to the front row. Dean Richard Harrington was standing there, sweating so profusely, his custom silk suit was practically glued to his back. He was trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, his eyes wide and pleading. He silently mouthed the word, please. Dean Harrington and I had a very enlightening conversation in his office this week. I announced to the crowd. He lectured me extensively on the value of hard work. He expressed a deep, passionate desire for the administration to connect more closely with the grueling reality of the low-income student body. He felt his massive, mahogany office was isolating him from the true spirit of this university. The crowd murmured in confusion. Harrington's eyes widened in absolute terror. He knew exactly what I was doing. Therefore, I smiled warmly. Dean Harrington will step down from his executive position immediately. However, he will not be fired. That would be too easy. Instead, as a condition of my $100, ling 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 ling, 00 donation, he will be permanently reassigned to a role where he can truly give back to the students he previously called a drain on our resources. I leaned into the microphone, enunciating every single syllable. Starting Monday, Richard Harrington will assume the vacant, non-transferable position of assistant cafeteria manager in the main dining hall. He will be strictly assigned to the 4:00 a.m. industrial dishwashing shift. If he quits, resigns, or is terminated for poor performance, my entire $100 million endowment is instantly revoked. The ballroom erupted. It was pure, unadulterated chaos. Trustees were gasping. Wealthy alumni were covering their mouths in shock. Down on the floor, Dean Harrington's knees finally gave out. He collapsed onto the marble floor, burying his face in his hands, letting out a pitiful, defeated sob. He was trapped. If he quit, he would be sued by the university for costing them $100 million. He was going to spend the rest of his career scrubbing the exact same greasy pans he had forced me to scrub just to survive. The president looked at the weeping man on the floor, then looked up at me. He didn't hesitate for a microsecond. We accept all terms. Miss Evans, the president announced loudly over the noise. Welcome to the board. 6 weeks later, the campus looked vastly different. I no longer lived in a drafty dorm room smelling of mildew. Arthur Sterling had secured a stunning tri-level penthouse, overlooking the city skyline, complete with a private chef and a dedicated fiber optic server room for my coding projects. My bank account, fueled by the massive daily royalties of Project Featherweight, had already effortlessly regenerated the money I had donated. I was richer now than I was on the night of the gala. But I still wore my comfortable gray hoodies. I still bought white canvas sneakers, though I bought them fresh, never having to scrub them with a toothbrush again. I was walking to my advanced algorithms class on a crisp Tuesday morning. I casually strolled past the massive Thebatian, freshly polished marble archway of the Eleanor Evans School of Business and Artificial Intelligence. It was a beautiful sight. Just past the business school, I saw a very familiar figure walking toward the student parking lot. It was Clue. She wasn't wearing Prada. She was wearing plain gray sweatpants and an oversized college t-shirt. She was carrying a cheap, nylon backpack. With her family's business heavily downsized and their university contracts voided, her father had strictly cut off her limitless credit cards. I watched as she walked past the VIP reserved parking spaces, holding her head down, and unlocked a used 10-year-old Honda Civic. She caught my eye through the windshield. She didn't sneer. She didn't roll her eyes. She just quickly looked away, her face flushing bright red with shame, and drove off. I continued my walk, stopping just outside the massive glass windows of the main dining hall. It was 11:30 a.m. Right in the middle of the lunch rush. I peered through the glass, looking into the industrial kitchen. There he was, Richard Harrington. He was wearing a cheap, stained polyester uniform and a mandatory hairnet that clung awkwardly to his balding head. He was holding a massive, high-pressure hose, desperately trying to scrub baked-on macaroni and cheese off a 50-pound aluminum tray. He looked exhausted. He looked thoroughly broken. As I watched, a 19-year-old sophomore shift supervisor, the exact same work-study student Harrington had yelled at in the hallway weeks ago, marched up to him, pointing aggressively at a spot he missed on the pan. Harrington didn't argue. He just nodded submissively, wiping sweat from his brow, and went back to scrubbing. I took a slow sip of my iced coffee, letting the absolute peace of the moment wash over me. Money doesn't inherently make you a better person. It doesn't instantly solve the complexities of the human soul, but it is the ultimate equalizer. It is the purest, most uncut form of leverage in a world designed to crush you. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to throw a tantrum. I just let the numbers speak for themselves. I turned away from the cafeteria window and walked toward my class, stepping lightly into my new reality. The world was finally operating on my code, and the algorithm was running flawlessly. What would you do if you woke up to $68 million in a forgotten account? Would you exact revenge on your enemies? Or quietly disappear to a private island? Let me know your master plan in the comments down below. Don't forget to crush that like button. Subscribe for more insane stories, and I'll see you in the next one.